everybody. Today we have a very special subject to talk in this webinar, and very important, which is parliamentary procedure. And we have a remarkable speaker, Hellen Swales from BPW New Zealand. She is a politician, deputy mayor of her city, and she was city council, federation president of BPW New Zealand, an expert, of course, in these matters. Thank you very much, Hellen. Thank you, all of you. Hellen, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all around parliamentary procedure and to give you a guide of what it is that we do in New Zealand. My hope is that you will be able to use and adapt some of these prompts to help you in your own venture in addressing the parliamentary procedure in your own meetings and when you're talking to government. So how do things work and how do we do things in New Zealand? So when we look at parliamentary procedure, the most basic thing is for us as BPW is that we look at how we apply that in our meetings. So when we open up a meeting, and best practices is that we have parliamentary procedures where it gives us a code of ethics, it gives us a set of rules to follow of how we respect each other and how we will conduct ourselves on the meeting floor or in that meeting. So having accepted and understanding what standing orders are, this sometimes can be a little bit foreign for some people. So best practice of running a meeting is to open up with an agenda, accept that agenda, and then move along to your standing orders. So when you do your standing orders, there is a purpose and objective behind each of those. And what I've done is just tried to capture that for you in the purpose and the statement that I have on this slide. So it's to regulate, moderate the exercise of legislative powers and capacity. Now that might come across as legal jargon, but actually when you translate that to a meeting, it's really about being appropriate with your behaviour, allowing people to have their time to speak without being interrupted. Now, when you have standing orders and you adopt them, you can also then suspend them, because there may come a time in a conversation, in a meeting, where you don't want the conversation to be recorded in any way, shape or form, or you want to allow a more rigorous debate. But that has to be a collective agreement that those at the meeting actually agree to suspend the standing orders. Then the objective of the standing orders is to, like I said, bring structure to the meeting, to actually give balance to the conversations that are taking part. And it can be that prescriptive that you only allow one of your members around the table to only speak once. But a good constitution actually has a set of standing orders in them, which actually define the way that you will run your meeting under the standing orders. It's good practice to actually introduce them, that when you go to your AGM or you go to a regional conference, or best yet, later this year, you go to Congress. Because one of the first things they will do is they will accept the standing orders, which gives us the parameters of how our meetings will go. So having had an understanding, it's good to read those before you go to any meeting, whether it's you're a member of a board, whether it's your own BPW club meeting or Congress or a regional meeting. It's good to have those standing orders there. It's good to have an understanding of how they work and they operate so that you can fully participate in the conversation and be a strong contributor and have your voice heard. So alerts. So when you're using the standing orders and you're using it to go out of the realm of your own meetings in your clubs or nationally, but you now want to actually use it in a government, your country's government, right? And you actually want to understand how those standing orders work and how to respond to the government procedures, which is slightly a little bit higher from taking it from your local club or a board to a national level. So when you take it to a national level, this is you engaging with your central government. And when you engage with your central government, you look for calls of action. So when you look for calls of action, what you're doing is you're familiarising yourself with the standing orders and the parameters that your government work through. The best way to do that is, because you don't have their constitution, but each government either is run by a framework or a constitution, and if you don't have access to that, your best way to find out how to engage and be productive in that space is to familiarise yourself with the government's website. Once you've learned how to navigate that website and ensure that you actually are familiar, that you get the best out of it, most websites will give you the ability to actually turn on an alert. Now, when you turn on an alert, what you're doing is you're asking that website or your government to let you know if there are any interesting bills that come up, if there are any interesting topics that may affect you as a club with regard to any policy, or may affect you with regard to wanting to respond because you're there advocating for women and girls. So once you've set up your alerts in a timely manner, they will send to your personal email address or your professional email address any alerts that will put or be within the parameters that you've given the alert system to let you know. So what we do in New Zealand is we use this to the best of our ability by looking at any pieces of legislation or amendments to bills and acts that actually have an impact on women and girls. So when our government is looking at making amendments or changes, we get these alerts, and within those alerts, what it tells us is we learn how to then, in a timely manner, when we have to respond to those alerts and how much time we have to go out to our members to collect that information. So it's a really good system that actually puts you in front so that you're being proactive than reactive, and you're hearing as soon as those things are being put out. So once you know how to do that, and you've learned how to do that, and you've navigated and you've become familiar, this is when you look, so what is my next step? What is it that I do? How do I get involved with that whole process? So this is where we look at the engagement process. And we can use all of these systems that I'm explaining to you, not only when we're responding to our central government, but when we're responding to our local government, when we're responding to boards. It can be used in a whole host of different ways of engagement. So the best way that we can look at, once we've got those alerts, is we write letters to our local government, official members of Parliament, or what we can do is, that's the first one that we always do, or we could start a petition, or we could write a submission. One thing we always have to do is we have to vote in an election, because that sets up who we want, who are like-minded people that will support our views. Or be really radical, which is what we try and do as BPW, is we promote and encourage people to stand as a member of Parliament or local government or on a board. So when we look at all of these points that we can engage, we can apply these across the board, as I have said. So practical examples of how we would do that. I mean, it's great to have these bullet points and it's great to talk about it, but sometimes it's the how do we do it that opens the door for that engagement. So when you have policies or past resolutions, and what happens is that in our country, when we put up a resolution that goes to our national conference, the onus is on the person who is putting up the resolution to actually write a template for a letter that clubs can take away and use. So whether they're writing to their local member of parliament or whether they are writing to a minister, there is a template and a guideline that they can use to actually promote. I believe we should be doing something very similar at our international congresses and at our meetings. If we are bringing examples or we're bringing projects, then the onus of the documentation or a template of that has got to be on the person that puts it on the table. So the other thing that we would, and I would suggest, if you're looking for building momentum or getting more support than what BPW membership can give you in your own club, in your own area, is to actually do a petition which opens it up to all sorts of people, other civil society organisations or non-government organisations, whichever term you're comfortable with, to actually get on board and support what it is that you want the government to address. What I have done in this presentation is that I've put a link in here that is a video YouTube link that our government put out that give you some ideas of how to successfully run a petition, whether it's a local petition or a national petition. And I suggest that if that's an option and it's something that you haven't tried, that this might be something of interest to you. And I'm hoping that the tool would be supportive in giving you the how to start a petition and the benefits of doing it. Then the next thing is to actually respond in your own capacity as business and professional women, whether you're a federation, an affiliate club, but to respond to those requests of legislation or amendments to the national bill. We in New Zealand know that when we respond to any pieces of legislation, that we always make reference to policies that have already been passed by our national members at our national conferences. And then we also go and look at the resolutions that have been passed at our international congresses. And the reason why we do that is that it gives us the opportunity to say to our members of parliament or our government that we're actually part of an international organisation that has membership in 5 continents, that we're in 90+ countries, and that we have a membership of over 22,000+ members. So it gives us a credibility, but we also mention that we are part of an organisation that actually has multi-diverse voices that we can say, that we can call upon. Once again, I've put a link in here that will help you with regards to how to engage with the parliament or the government of the day in your country, that takes you through the process of how to write a good submission. Remember, you don't have to put everything in there. There is a process, but it's to get the history, the research data in that submission. All the other stuff comes in another stage of the submission. What I have provided here is a flow chart of how it works in New Zealand. I'm not saying this is how it works in every country, but it gives you an idea of the flow of how we work and how the process happens in our country. I appreciate that in other countries there are different structures. In Australia, our sister country just over the ditch has a 2-tier government system. I am aware that it is totally different in the States and in the UK. All of the Commonwealth countries, whilst we're similar, we are different. But the process is not that far from the documentation or the flowchart that I've put up here. I've tried to make everything that I've given you adaptable to how things work in your country. So after the flowchart and you've got an issue and an understanding of what happens, the next part is the oral submission. So when you put in a submission, you always end with that you would like to present an oral submission when you've put in your written submission. And what then happens is that when it is receipted by the central government or the select committee who receives that submission, They then will respond back to you with a number of times where you can choose to go and physically front up to that select committee and talk to them. Now, the reason why doing an oral submission is important is that you take every opportunity to increase your profile as an organisation in the country, that you actually want to build on your credibility as an organisation, and you're putting yourself out there that you are the go-to organisation on particular issues. Now, BPW has a number of particular issues that we have been advocating for since our inception. One of them is, which we all know about, is Red Bag Day. So if you want to become the go-to civil society or non-government organisation, then you have to start entering in this process and showing that you're more than just a talk fest, that you're credible and that you have a history. The other reason why you do an oral submission is that you are adding value to your written submission. So remember, your written submission is all the research data, it is the references that give your arguments substantive information and credibility, and sometimes the time lead-in to do a written submission is not long enough for you to put the emotional stuff in there. So you write your written submission, and if you haven't been able to collect all the data in the time frame, you still submit it because you get a second bite of the cherry. So the second bite of the cherry is picking up all that information that wasn't in your written submission, and like I said, it is introducing the emotion, the real stories, that if this legislation isn't amended in the suggestive ways or suggested ways that you have said in your recommendation of your written submission, then this is where you play on their emotions by giving them the impact and the consequences of what inactive situations mean for women and girls. So this is where you go out to your membership and you say, provide me with real life stories that are affecting women and girls. Tell us why it is difficult for them to access funding to get a better representation in court. Tell us why it's difficult for them to have access to free medical care. All of those things are really important, and the only way you can get that message across is if you're sitting in front of people and you actually play that emotional card. The other thing that a lot of people tend to forget when they do an oral submission is they take their papers along and they read. But remember, the person that is hearing you is only as good as what they're hearing at the time of your delivery. It's like when you've done a presentation, you always leave something there for them to pick up. So we always take a copy of our oral submission and give it to the secretary of the clerk so that she can distribute it to the members sitting around that table so that they have a hard copy there to remind them of those emotional ploys and what it was that we said. The other important thing to do is that when you have a time allotted to you for your oral submission, the biggest mistake a lot of people do is they use up that entire time in their or with their oral submission. My suggestion is that if you're given a 10-minute slot, that you speak for no longer than 5 minutes and that you leave time for question and answers. If you're able to, it is always really good to leave them in your winding up with your recommendations, to leave them with a question, because then immediately it starts that dialogue of them coming back and asking you something. So these are little ploys that we've learnt through the years of how to get the best value out of the parliamentary procedures when we're dealing with our central government. So, like I said, it's really important that you leave that time for those questions to be asked when you're doing the oral submissions. The other thing that I would like to say about the parliamentary procedure and what is happening out there is that all of these things can be practiced in your national AGM. These are things when we call for submissions from our club that come to our AGM. These are the sorts of things, and this is how we actually get our people to speak to their submissions. So we've received their written ones and we've asked them to do the oral submission. This is also the best practice that you use when you come to International Congress. At the moment, when International Congress calls out for submissions to go there, these are the sorts of things that you should be thinking about when you're putting your submissions together, that you make sure that you actually are within the timeframes to give your oral submission, because if you're used to presenting in an international forum, for those of you that go to the United Nations, they will cut you off. So you need to be quite prescriptive in your presentation, getting your bullet points across and making sure that actually everything that you want to say or articulate is in there first. You always ask them and thank them for their time and hope that they will look at the recommendations that you've put on the floor, and you always ask them for their support in ending or closing. So you're asking for a call to action. So hopefully with all of those things that I've put out there and gone through in this presentation, you will be able to take some pearls of wisdom or be able to take some notes out of it that will help you. I'm hoping the links that I've put in there are helpful to you, that will give you some ideas of how to better promote yourself and your voice of your club, of your federation or affiliate in your own country, that it demystifies standing orders and the procedure of actually engaging not only in your local meetings, in your monthly meetings, but then at your national meetings and then at your international meetings. Because once you have the procedures and the protocols in place, you will find that the engagement is more fruitful for you, it is far more rewarding for you, and the learning that you get puts you in good stead for whether you're looking at standing on a board or whether you want to stand for an elected position, whether it's a local government or central government. So there is nothing more for me to say other than to thank you for your time, and I hope that you found this helpful.
Thank you again to Hellen for presenting today in her area of expertise without any doubt, which is parliamentary procedure. As a parliamentarian, as a politician of many years, and as the current national president in BPW New Zealand, Hellen is well qualified to talk to us about parliamentary procedure and how best you can utilize this procedure for successful proceedings in your club and in your federation, but also for successful engagement at the political level, locally, nationally, and even internationally, within our organization and in the advocacy that we do in the political arena for the issues of women and women's rights. So again, thank you for your contribution, and to all of you, thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you here again soon.